Back in our sophomore year of college, I crossed paths with Wendy, and we hit it off right away. She had this cascade of rich auburn hair, striking blue eyes, a flawless face, and those impossibly long, lean legs that made her seem almost too perfect. But it wasn't just her looks that got me hooked. It was her electric personality. Wendy was sharp, full of life, and incredibly fun. We could chat endlessly about anything and everything. Soon, we were practically inseparable, and after 3 months together, she gave herself to me in the back of my car parked behind the town's baseball diamond. Until that point, it was the most unforgettable moment of my life. From then on, I thought we were destined to stay together forever, or at least that's what I believed for the next decade. I'm Jamie, short for James Milne, born and raised in a fairly sized Midwestern town. I'm 6 feet tall, 187 pounds, with brown eyes and sandy hair. Some say I'm decent looking. I run a small contracting business with 5 employees, specializing in interior renovations for clients who can afford our touch. Wendy works as a music teacher at the local high school, and together we had a steady life in our early 30s, making plans to start a family. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I was convinced we were blissfully happy. We weren't intimate daily, but our lovemaking, about 3 times a week, was always warm and passionate. Every night we'd snuggle up, and every morning, I'd wake up grateful to have Wendy as my wife. I would have laid down my life for her without a second thought, though now I realize that's all in the past. Then, out of nowhere, something blindsided me. Something so shocking and emotionally brutal that even now, I can't say I've fully come to grips with it. Being a contractor here in the Midwest means our busiest season is summer through fall. People don't want their homes torn up in the freezing winter. So Wendy and I usually took vacations around Christmas, New Year's, or during spring break. In the summer, while I was bogged down with work, she'd go off to visit her parents, shop with her sisters, or take classes to keep up her teaching credentials. Our favorite getaway was to escape the winter chill for somewhere warm and sunny. That year, we chose an all-inclusive resort in the Bahamas, a 2-week slice of paradise, or so I thought, a chance to reconnect. As we headed to the airport in Minneapolis, I had no idea anything was wrong between us. If someone had suggested there was a problem, I would have laughed in their face. In my eyes, Wendy and I were a perfect couple, deeply in love and inseparable, with a bond that felt unbreakable. I never thought there could be anything darker under the surface. But the first sign that something was off came at the security checkpoint at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The line was long, packed with people eager to leave the freezing Midwest for somewhere warm. While waiting to pass through, I noticed a man in the next line giving Wendy some very pointed looks. Sure, Wendy got her share of attention from men, but this seemed different. He looked like he was trying to catch her eye. I kept my face buried in my boarding pass, but I was watching him closely. His glances were sneaky, but then I saw Wendy look back at him with a subtle signal that seemed to mean, "Not here." He smiled and nodded, and I felt my stomach drop. They knew each other, that much was clear. How well, I couldn't be sure, but it was enough to raise alarm bells. As we moved through security, I kept a close eye on them, but there was no further interaction. I stayed quiet, hoping Wendy wouldn't notice, but she seemed lost in her own thoughts. I found myself praying he wouldn't be on our flight, but once we boarded and took our seats, I realized I was wrong. He was there, sitting in an aisle seat about 15 rows ahead. Oddly enough, Wendy chose the aisle seat in our row. She had always insisted on the window. When I asked why, pointing out that I'd booked the window seat just for her, she brushed it off, saying she wasn't feeling well and didn't want to be a bother if she needed to go to the restroom. I managed to convince the person in the aisle seat to switch, explaining my wife's supposed stomach issues, and they didn't seem to mind. Normally, I can sleep easily on long flights, but this time, my nerves were shot. Even though I pretended to doze off, there was no way I could sleep. We had stored our carry-ons in the overhead, and Wendy slid her purse under the seat in front of her. Once the plane took off, I pulled my twins' cap down over my face, pretending to sleep while my mind spun with doubts. About 15 minutes into the flight, Wendy glanced at me, as if checking that I was asleep, and quietly got up, heading toward the restroom. I adjusted my seat just enough to catch a clear view of the aisle. Sure enough, she passed by that man's row, reached out to steady herself, and her hand brushed his shoulder. This wasn't a chance encounter. There was something between them. She didn't look back, but when she returned, she glanced directly at him. He got up, walking toward her, and instead of sidestepping, they paused in the aisle. He put his hand on her waist, and she placed her hand on his chest for a moment, both smiling warmly. His hand slid down to her lower back, making her smile again. In that split second, my illusions about us crumbled. They were more than casual acquaintances. My heart plummeted with the realization that my marriage was in serious jeopardy. As she returned to her seat, buckling her seatbelt, I turned away, feeling numb. How could she betray us like this? How long had this been going on? And who was he to her, really? The rest of the flight, I battled these questions, horrified by the idea that he might even be on our connecting flight to Nassau. I somehow knew, though, that he would be, and, sure enough, my fears were confirmed. As soon as Wendy and I boarded, there he was, sitting 5 rows behind us, flipping through an in-flight magazine, pretending not to see us. Wendy, now miraculously feeling better, slipped into her usual window seat without a word. The flight down to Nassau went by without incident, and once we landed, we grabbed our bags, rented a car, and headed straight for the resort. Wendy was busy texting as I drove, so I asked, "Who are you messaging?" She replied casually, "Just my mom and sisters, letting them know we made it." Yeah, right, I thought. I'd really like to see that for myself. It's strange how suspicions can start as little whispers and then grow into a storm in your head. Our room was breathtaking, with a balcony that looked out over the ocean and one of the resort's pools. As we started unpacking, I thought, I've got to do something here. I've got to get her back. I walked over to Wendy, wrapped my arms around her from behind, and kissed her neck. "Do you know how much I love you?" She turned to give me a quick peck on the lips and said, "I love you too, baby." But her gaze was distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. Chilled me to the bone. I kissed her again, trying to reach her. "You know I'd never do anything to hurt you, right, Wendy?" She flinched, barely meeting my eyes. "Of course, Jamie, you know I wouldn't," she said. But her voice felt hollow, and her eyes dropped to the floor. Right then, it hit me. I might be losing her. If she hadn't already crossed the line with someone else, it felt inevitable. I let go, barely holding back my own tears, and went to the bathroom, battling my spiraling thoughts. How did we get here? What did I do wrong? Why didn't I see this coming? But the biggest question was, can I even save us? Or am I already too late? I splashed water on my face, trying to collect myself, and walked out of the bathroom to find Wendy standing there, looking tense. "Oh my God, Jamie. I just got my period, and I didn't bring any tampons," she blurted out. "What?" I asked, trying to process her words. "My period just started," she said with a hint of urgency. "But you just had it a week ago. How could it start again so soon?" "I don't know," she said quickly. "Maybe it's just the excitement of the trip or something. I'm going to head down to the gift shop and get what I need." And before I could respond, she hurried out, closing the door behind her. First, I thought maybe it's a good thing. This could slow down whatever she has going on with her friend. But then it struck me as odd. She was always regular with her periods, thanks to the pill. Why would she suddenly need this excuse? Unless she figured her period would keep me at a distance, freeing her up to focus on someone else. The thought was like a punch to the gut. Could she really be that calculating? To let me plan and pay for a trip, only to shut me out and devote herself to another man? If so, then she wasn't the woman I married. She was someone else entirely. Someone cruel. As I looked around the room, my eyes landed on her phone, sitting right there beside the TV. I picked it up, half expecting that she'd change the passcode, but she hadn't. Another careless mistake. I went straight to her messages, and there it was, the latest ones from someone named Harry Haig. I scrolled up to the start of their conversation, which had begun while we were driving to the resort. "Harry, hey baby, you look incredible. Can't wait to see you." Wendy, you naughty boy. You almost got us caught by Jamie at the airport. Harry, couldn't help it. Almost kissed you on the plane when we were in the aisle. Wendy, Jamie was asleep. You probably could have, but people might have noticed. I feel my pulse quicken as I keep reading. Then I see the message where Harry asks if she's in the lobby yet. Wendy, in my room. Jamie's in the bathroom acting weird. Harry replies almost instantly, dismissing me like I'm an afterthought. When's he going to leave so I can finally have you to myself? It's hard to breathe, but I can't stop now. I keep scrolling. Wendy, I told you, Harry, I can't and won't leave Jamie. He's a wonderful husband. He loves me, and he's given me a life you never could. Harry comes back with something crude, boasting that he's better for her in ways I never could be. Her response feels like a knife. Wendy, oh yes, no one satisfies me like you do, baby. You take me places Jamie doesn't even know exist. My chest tightens as I read on. Then I see her last message. Jamie and I are planning to start a family, so these next 2 weeks are just for you. Baby, I told Jamie I'd stop my birth control when we get home, but I actually stopped almost 3 weeks ago. Now you have the chance to get me pregnant. If you give me a baby, Jamie won't ever know. I stopped reading, feeling like I'd been punched. The life I thought we were building was a lie. This whole trip was a setup, not a chance to reconnect, but her chance to make someone else the father of our future child. The pain and betrayal were suffocating. She had thrown away everything we had and shattered every ounce of trust I'd placed in her. At first, I considered swapping her phone with mine, just to see what she'd do. But then I thought, why should I? She dug this hole herself. Let her figure out how to climb out of it. Besides, my phone held all my personal information. I wasn't about to hand it over. I kept both phones, fully aware she'd realize hers was missing soon. But by then, I'd be long gone. A wave of nausea washed over me, nearly making me gag. I walked to the window, staring blankly out at the stunning Caribbean view. Just 8 hours ago, I was the happiest guy in the world, eagerly anticipating 2 weeks in paradise with the woman I thought I knew, my wife, my partner. Now, it felt like my entire world had been turned to ashes. I'd never felt so utterly alone, so betrayed, so furious. Part of me wanted to tear them both apart for making a fool of me. But luckily, logic took over. Divorce was inevitable. There was no way I could stay married to this woman. A woman who used to be my loving wife but had turned into someone I barely recognized. But divorce alone didn't feel like enough. I needed payback. As I kept staring out the window, I happened to glance down at the pool. There they were, tangled up in each other, sharing a passionate kiss. Harry's hands roamed all over Wendy's body, making me want to retch. Instead, I took a deep breath and picked up the video camera I'd packed for vacation memories, now set to capture something very different. Wendy must have forgotten that our room offered a perfect view of the pool, or maybe she just didn't care. My camera had a solid zoom so I could capture their betrayal in detail. It made me sick to my stomach, but I knew I needed this as ammunition. I needed a plan, but my thoughts were all over the place. Then it hit me. How were they going to spend time alone while I was around? They must have a scheme to keep me occupied. As I thought it over, an idea started forming. Wendy wanted these 2 weeks alone with him to make a baby. So why not flip her plans on their head? I kept recording, watching them kiss one last time before Wendy hurried off. She'd be back any moment, and I had to pull myself together. I went into the bathroom and turned on the shower, hoping the steam might help me calm down. If she asked, I'd say I needed to shake off the travel fatigue. 5 minutes later, I heard the door open and close. "I'm back," she called out. "I got us some water and my tampons." "Great. I'll be out in a minute." But something about it didn't sit right. Why bring water when the resort provided it? Then it hit me. She planned to drug me, knock me out to buy herself time with him. My mind raced. If I refused the water, she'd be suspicious, but if I drank it, I'd be out cold, leaving them free to do whatever they wanted. I turned off the shower, drying myself slowly, trying to buy time to think. Then Wendy knocked on the door. "Are you okay in there? You've been in a while," she said, sounding concerned, or at least pretending to. I couldn't tell if she was genuinely worried or just eager to meet her lover. My anger flared, but I managed to keep calm. Opening the door, I saw her standing by the bed, sipping from a water bottle, holding another one already opened and ready for me. Here, we need to stay hydrated in this climate, she said, handing it to me without making eye contact. I took the bottle and pretended to take a big drink, then went back to the bathroom, quietly spitting the water into the sink before emptying the rest down the drain. I filled the bottle with fresh water from the counter and returned to the room. She was busy unpacking, not noticing a thing. I continued to sip from my bottle, and then I noticed the red dress laid out on the bed. Is that for dinner? Seems a shame not to go, I said, hinting that we should make a night of it, knowing the dress was meant for him, not me. I brought it, so I might as well wear it, she replied with a smile. Aren't you tired from the travel, though? Bingo. She definitely put something in my water, hoping to knock me out. What was my next move? I needed more evidence. To keep up the act, I pretended to feel drowsy, even taking another sip, though adrenaline was pulsing through me. Now that you mention it, I am a little tired. What time's dinner? I asked, faking exhaustion. Not for a few hours. Why don't you lie down for a bit? I'll wake you up when it's time, she suggested, her tone laced with fake concern. I yawned and played along. All right, just don't let me sleep too long. I want to spend every moment with you. Love you so much. I watched her reaction, noticing a brief flicker of discomfort in her eyes. I love you too, she replied, but her words felt hollow. I lay down, slowing my breathing to mimic sleep, and soon, I heard her whispering into the phone. It worked. He's out. How long do you think he'll stay asleep? She murmured. We've got the whole night, she giggled, her voice thick with excitement. I felt my stomach twist, but I stayed perfectly still. I'll meet you at the bar in an hour. I need to freshen up first, she said, laughing. You're so bad. Can't wait, lover. Bye. She hung up, and I watched her through half-closed eyes as she chose her lingerie, a thong and push-up bra. Fury burned inside me, but I kept it under control. She headed to the bathroom to shower. This was my moment. I got up quietly and rummaged through her purse, finding a bottle of unmarked pills. I took 5, wrapped them in tissue, and hid them in my pocket before putting the bottle back. I climbed back into bed just as she finished her shower. She took her time getting ready, and the moment she left, I sprang into action. I needed more evidence, a way to ruin their trip, and a head start on the divorce. I grabbed my camera and headed for the bar area. The resort wasn't huge, with only 2 bars along the beach. I positioned myself behind some palm trees, where I could watch without being seen. The camera's zoom was perfect for this. It wasn't too crowded, which made it easy to spot them. She wore that red dress I once adored, but now, it only fueled my anger. He had his hands all over her, and I had to fight the urge to confront him right there. But I reminded myself I was here for evidence, not to end up in jail. I recorded as they acted like a pair of lovebirds on vacation, laughing, touching, and kissing just the way Wendy and I used to. After about an hour, a DJ started spinning some music, and the 2 of them went out onto the dance floor. Watching them together twisted my stomach, and for a second, I considered walking away. But then I saw them slip off the floor, moving quickly, so I followed, staying far enough back. They paused here and there to kiss and touch, and I recorded every second. Eventually, they arrived at his room near the back of the resort, a small, ground-floor unit with no ocean view. Guess he's on a budget, I thought. They went inside, and I crept closer, positioning myself to catch their words and actions on camera. As they undressed, I recorded everything. He was well endowed. I'll give him that, but nothing excused her betrayal or her twisted plan to have his child. They took their time, and I felt each passing second crawl as I watched, every moment digging the knife in deeper. This guy didn't just have the equipment. He had stamina, too, and as midnight approached, I figured she'd head back to our room soon. But then I caught something in their conversation that froze me in place. Are you sure those pills are safe? I don't want him having some kind of seizure, she said with what sounded like genuine concern. How touching. Relax, babe. He'll be out for at least another 6 hours. Worst case, he wakes up with a headache. You only used 1 pill, right? Yes, just 1. Why? What would happen if I used 2? She asked, almost curious. He chuckled. 2 would knock him out for 12 hours, easy. Just stick to 1 each night, and we'll have our time together. I want to see you pregnant before these 2 weeks are up. I heard him hand her something. Here's an extra key to my room. If you can slip away during the day, just call me, and we'll meet here. Their laughter filled me with rage, almost making me gag. I'd seen enough, heard enough. Quietly, I left and made my way back to our room, my mind already working on a plan to make them feel every bit of pain they'd caused me. She clearly wanted to spend every night with him, and I'd make sure that didn't happen. Back in my room, I reviewed the footage, even though it sickened me. But with each painful moment I watched, a plan started to take shape. The first step was simple. I needed to split them up so I could deal with her lover alone. Maybe I'd spike his drink with one of those pills and beat him senseless while he was out cold. He wouldn't know what hit him, and he'd have no way of tracing it back to me. But to get that chance, I had to ensure they'd be apart first. Then it came to me. I'd treat Wendy to a day at the spa. The resort had one offering massages, facials, and even makeup services. I'd buy her a whole package, framing it as a surprise gift to show my love. If she tried to refuse, I'd guilt her into it, just as she'd manipulated me. She'd have no choice but to accept, and it would keep her busy for hours, leaving me free to handle her lover. I changed into my shorts and lay in bed, fuming over thoughts of them together and the beating I'd deliver to him. Around 5 a.m., Wendy finally returned, slipping quietly into bed beside me. I stayed motionless, pretending to be asleep. Then around 7 a.m., I woke up. She was still asleep, so I quickly showered and went to the spa. It opened early, and I booked her a 3-hour package, with the earliest available slot at 2 p.m. perfect. I wandered the resort grounds until 9 a.m. before heading back to our room. When I got there, Wendy was still sound asleep, so I checked her phone. There was a fresh message from Harry. You were incredible last night. Any chance you can sneak away from Jamie this afternoon? Rage surged, but I kept calm, leaning over and planting a kiss on her forehead just as she started to stir. Morning, I said, feigning remorse. I'm sorry about last night, falling asleep and ruining our dinner plans. But I've got a surprise to make it up to you. She smiled, stretching. What's the surprise? She asked, trying to sound cheerful. I booked you a spa day to make up for it and to show you how much I care, I said with a soft smile. Even in her sleepy state, I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes, and I wondered if she was finally questioning her actions. Thank you, Jamie, she said, managing a weak smile. I just wish you'd asked me first. If I'd asked, it wouldn't be a surprise. Don't worry. You don't need to rush. Your appointment's at 2 o'clock, so we've got time together this morning, I said, watching her closely. You're very thoughtful. Thank you, she replied, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. Her breath had a faintly strange, fishy smell, which turned my stomach. Why don't you freshen up? Then we can grab some breakfast, I suggested, getting up from the bed. As she headed into the bathroom with her purse, I watched her carefully, knowing she was up to something but not wanting to tip her off. From our window, I spotted Harry by the pool, casually chatting with 2 women and checking his phone. He didn't look remotely worried about the spa plan. He might even be lining up backup options in case Wendy couldn't meet him. It was good information to have. About an hour later, we went down to the breakfast buffet. I loaded up my plate, but she only picked at some fruit and coffee. Not hungry, babe? Is it because of your period? I asked, feigning concern. Oh yeah, must be, she said, barely focusing on her food. I could tell something was weighing on her, likely a text from Harry. But it didn't matter. My plan was rolling along just fine. After breakfast, we took a walk along the beach. I carried my camera, filming the scenery and occasionally turning it on her. She smiled for the lens, but guilt and hesitation clouded her eyes. "What's on your mind, babe? Are you okay?" I asked, putting on a caring tone. "I'm fine, just a bit tired. Do you mind if I go back to the room for a nap before the spa?" she said, obviously wanting to get away. "Of course. Go get some rest, and I'll see you after the spa," I said, sounding sympathetic. She nodded and headed back without another word, leaving me alone with my simmering anger and satisfaction. It was time to find Harry and make him pay. I walked along the beach, lost in my thoughts, until I noticed two couples walking toward me. The women were the same ones I'd seen Harry talking to earlier, now joined by two large guys who looked like they belonged on a football field. As they came closer, I caught bits of their conversation. "Come on, babe, don't be like that. You knew Dave and I wanted to go deep-sea fishing, and we got 2 spots open. We'll be back before dinner," one of the men said, trying to soothe his girlfriend. "Oh, sure. You guys always do whatever you want while we're stuck here at the hotel," she replied, annoyed. "Hey, there's plenty for you to do here. You could go shopping, hang out by the pool, or even hit the gym," he said, trying to keep the peace. "What, you think I need the gym? Look who's talking," she snapped. "No, babe, that's not what I meant. I just figured you'd find something fun to do here," he backtracked, clearly losing the argument as they passed by, heading back toward the resort. After they walked on, I decided to check on Harry, hoping she might still be with him. I wandered the grounds, eventually finding myself outside his room. I heard voices from inside, but none of them were hers. I positioned my camera on the window ledge, carefully angling it to capture everything inside Harry's room. It was risky in broad daylight, but I needed the footage. Once the camera was set, I found a hidden spot nearby where I could keep an eye on his door without being seen. Time dragged on slowly, but patience paid off. Eventually, the 2 women I'd seen earlier exited Harry's room, giggling and looking disheveled. As soon as they were gone, I retrieved the camera and returned to my room. I knew Wendy wouldn't be back from the spa for a while, so I had time to review the recordings. Back in my room, I downloaded the videos to my laptop. Most of the footage was painful but expected, Wendy and Harry together, but the latest video shocked me. I watched as Harry and the 2 women engaged in a full-blown threesome. It felt like something out of a cheap porn movie. He'd be with one while the other watched, then they'd switch. They even laughed and joked about how much bigger he was compared to their boyfriends. A new idea started forming in my mind. If I timed this right, I could be back home before Wendy even realized what happened. I figured she'd try to drug me again that night, so I'd play along, acting like I'd fallen for it. Then, while she was busy with Harry, I could spike their drinks before they reached his room, knocking them out cold. The next step was to create a copy of Harry's afternoon activities. I couldn't help feeling a flash of jealousy that he'd managed to persuade 2 attractive women to join him, but I refocused. I made 2 DVDs of his escapades and backed up all the footage I'd collected on a 3rd disc. Then, I headed down to the front desk and mailed the backup disc to my brother Robert, including a note that simply said, "For safekeeping. Don't play it and don't tell anyone you have it." This way, if anything went wrong or if Wendy and Harry tried to retaliate, at least the truth would come out. Checking the time, I realized Wendy's spa session would be ending soon. I decided to take a quick walk around the resort, hoping to figure out which rooms the 2 women and their boyfriends were staying in. Not long after, I spotted the women near the pool, and I followed them at a distance. As they walked back to their rooms, I saw them enter side-by-side rooms, exactly as I'd hoped. Now, if Wendy and Harry stuck to their usual routine, I could wreck their perfect vacation by tomorrow morning. Back in my room, I called the airline to book the earliest possible flight out for the next day. The soonest I could get was 10 a.m., not ideal, but it would have to do. I also let the front desk know we had a family emergency and would need to check out the following morning. They offered their sympathies, which I accepted before heading back to my room, fully committed to the plan. Even if things didn't go perfectly, I'd be on that flight and beat Wendy home. But if everything went smoothly, she'd be stranded here with her world turned upside down. The plan was straightforward. First, I'd let Wendy think she'd successfully drugged me again and pretend to pass out, giving her and Harry their alone time. Next, I'd wait for them at the bar and, at the right moment, slipped the same pills into their drinks. If timed right, they'd pass out either before they reached his room or just after. Afterward, I'd move Wendy back to our room and clear out Harry's things, his wallet, cash, passport, everything. Then, I'd leave the DVDs of his escapades under the doors of the two women from earlier, knowing their boyfriends would likely find and watch them. Finally, I'd do the same to Wendy, leaving only her clothes and purse, along with a note in her empty wallet so she'd know exactly who was behind it. When Wendy finally returned at 5:30 p.m., she looked radiant and refreshed. It pained me to think of how our marriage had come to this. "Jamie, thank you so much for the spa day. It was amazing. I feel like a new person," she said, practically glowing. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. When I mentioned it earlier, you didn't seem too thrilled, but I wanted to show you how much I care," I replied, noting the brief flinch in her expression and the glint of tears in her eyes. "Thank you again. I really loved it, and I love you," she said, her voice more heartfelt than usual. "Anytime, babe. I've made dinner reservations for 7 o'clock. How about we rest a little before getting ready?" I suggested, keeping my tone light. She nodded, heading to the bathroom with her purse. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 water bottles, handing one to me. "Drink up. I'm planning on hitting the dance floor tonight, so you'd better start hydrating," she said with a wink. All right. Let me use the bathroom first," I chuckled, taking the bottle with me. Inside, I followed the same routine as before, emptying the bottle's contents and refilling it with tap water. I flushed for good measure and returned to the room, sipping my water as I prepared to act sleepy. 15 minutes later, I started my drowsy act, and soon, I was pretending to be sound asleep. I listened as Wendy prepared for her perfect night with Harry. She showered, and when she stepped away, I grabbed her phone and scanned her messages. "Wendy, couldn't slip away this afternoon. Jamie bought me a spa package. Couldn't say no. Harry, no worries, babe. I found other plans. Still on for tonight. Wendy, absolutely. I need that big hard Johnson and its seed for our baby. Harry, can't wait to be between your legs and hear you scream my name." Reading that filth, my rage burned hotter, but knowing the end was near helped me hold it together. All I needed to do now was follow them to the bar, observe for a bit, and then slip the pills into their drinks. I rummaged through her purse again and found the spare key card to Harry's room, which I pocketed discreetly before putting everything back in place. As the evening drew closer, I could feel my anticipation building. Wendy took her time getting ready, but then she did something that caught me off guard. She sat down beside me, lightly touching my cheek. "Jamie, after this week, I'll be all yours. I swear," she murmured. "I just needed to get this out of my system before we start a family. I wish I could have told you that you'd understand, but I had to do this. These next few days are for me. I know I should have been honest, but I love you so much, Jamie. I need you more than you know." She kissed my cheek softly. "I do love you," she whispered. For a second, I almost thought she knew I wasn't asleep, but it was clear she was only trying to soothe her guilty conscience. It was far too late for that. Once she left the room, I got up, dressed, and followed her at a safe distance. They headed to the same bar as before, which was packed with people, even busier than the previous night. I quickly spotted the 2 women from earlier with their boyfriends. If my plan went as intended, those couples wouldn't be together by morning. I set up in my previous spot, positioning my camera to capture everything. The night played out exactly as I expected. Wendy and Harry sat at a table, laughing and chatting, completely oblivious. It was time to make my move. I went to the bar, making sure I stayed out of their sight, and ordered a beer, keeping them in my line of vision. When their waitress came to place their order, I overheard her give it to the bartender. I flagged down a second bartender and ordered the exact same drinks. As the bartender prepared their drinks, I discreetly opened a capsule, carefully mixing the powder into each glass. I stirred each drink until the powder dissolved, watching as the fizz settled and the drinks looked normal again. With both glasses in hand, I made my way through the crowd, smoothly swapping the tampered drinks for their originals without the waitress noticing a thing. The bustling bar atmosphere worked perfectly to hide my moves. I returned to my spot and waited, hoping my timing was on point. It was just past 1 a.m., and if all went according to plan, the pills would knock them out until around 11 a.m., lining up perfectly with the next steps of my strategy. Now, I just needed them to finish their drinks and head back to Harry's room before they passed out. Anxiety gnawed at me as I watched them sip their drinks slowly. What if they didn't finish? What if the pills didn't take full effect? But my worries disappeared when Harry leaned over and whispered something to Wendy, and they both quickly finished their drinks and stood to leave. I sighed in relief. Keeping a discreet distance, I trailed behind them as they made their way back to his room. Wendy was already stumbling, barely able to walk straight, and Harry had to support her, his arm around her waist. By the time they reached his room, he was beginning to sway as well. My timing had been perfect. Now I just had to wait for the pills to take full effect. At the door, Wendy was practically collapsing, and Harry could barely keep himself upright. He fumbled with the keycard, finally getting it to work, and they both stumbled inside. I waited a few minutes, letting them settle in, before using the key card I'd swiped from Wendy's purse to enter the room. Inside, I heard Harry's slurred voice. "What's wrong with you, babe? You didn't drink that much." His words trailed off as he slumped, struggling to keep his eyes open. I moved closer to the bed, where Wendy lay face down, completely out cold. Harry tried to shake her awake, mumbling, "Come on, babe. It's time to make a baby." Then he noticed me and tried to get up, staggering. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, barely coherent. "Oh, just her husband. Now, why don't you do us all a favor and pass out?" I said calmly. Right on cue, he collapsed onto the floor and didn't move again. With him out cold, I turned to survey the room. His phone was lying nearby, and curiosity got the better of me. I started scrolling through it, uncovering a treasure trove of photos. Some harmless, but others that were pure gold. He had a folder filled with images of women in various stages of undress, some doing explicit things. Among them were several of Wendy. But what shocked me even more were the faces I recognized. Some of the women were teachers from Wendy's school and even wives of her colleagues. Apparently, Harry had a habit of pursuing married women, and that was about to come back to haunt him. I went through his contact list and started sharing these photos and videos, excluding the ones of Wendy, with everyone on his list. I made sure to tag a few husbands and even some of Harry's male colleagues, including a few videos for good measure. Harry was in for a rude awakening when he got home. Next, I sent the images and videos of Wendy to her phone, then forwarded them from her phone to mine, just in case I needed them later. A little blackmail wouldn't hurt. With his phone secured, I moved on to clearing out the room. I stuffed his clothes, toiletries, and anything else he'd brought on the trip into his suitcase, checked his pockets, and took everything valuable. His cash, wallet, credit cards, driver's license, and, most importantly, his passport. Without that, leaving the island would be nearly impossible for him. Once his suitcase was packed, I focused on Wendy, still unconscious on the bed. I carefully rolled her onto her back, lifted her, and carried her back to our room. After laying her on our bed, I returned to Harry's room to grab the rest of his belongings. I kept his phone, wallet, and cash as a kind of compensation. Then I tossed his shoes and suitcase into the resort dumpster, making sure to cover them with trash to keep them hidden. Back in my room, I packed up my own suitcase and Wendy's, putting the same care into hers as I did Harry's. I'd leave her with just the clothes on her back, her purse, a couple of tampons, and an empty wallet with a note inside from me. It was around 4 a.m., and I had to be at the airport by 9 a.m. With Wendy having finished her drink around 2 a.m., she'd likely be out until noon, giving me more than enough time. Harry should wake up around 10 a.m., and by then, I'd be long gone. Before leaving, I grabbed the 2 DVDs I'd made earlier and slid one under each door of the rooms where the 2 women and their boyfriends were staying. Moving quickly and quietly, I made sure they wouldn't notice anything until morning. Back in my room, I took one last look at Wendy, lying there unaware of how drastically her life was about to change. I slipped the note into her empty wallet and zipped up my suitcase, ready to leave her to pick up the pieces. Looking at Wendy sleeping so peacefully on the bed brought a wave of loss and sadness. I had once imagined building a life and family with her, but her betrayal shattered any chance of forgiveness. I double-checked that everything was packed, took her suitcase, and dumped it in the same dumpster where I'd thrown Harry's belongings. Back in the room, I rifled through her purse one last time, ensuring it was completely empty. No money, no credit cards, and no passport. I wanted her to face the same struggle getting home as Harry. Worn out, I collapsed into a chair, my mind racing with thoughts of what awaited me back home. My first order of business would be to drain our bank accounts and cancel all our credit cards. Then, I'd pack up my things and get out of our house, maybe stash everything in a storage unit for the time being. The details didn't matter. I just needed to escape. From the house, from this sham of a marriage. Somewhere along the line, I dozed off, and when I woke up, it was nearly 7 a.m. I forced myself up, took one last look at Wendy, and carefully carried her out of the room. Down by the pool, I laid her on a lounge chair. I didn't want her lying in our room when the cleaning crew came by. Back in the room, I gathered my bags and did one final check, making sure I hadn't left anything behind. I still had Harry's phone, which sparked a new idea. I returned to the pool, grabbed Wendy's phone, and began sending all the incriminating photos and videos to everyone in her contacts, sparing only her young nieces and nephews. Her parents, her siblings, her coworkers, they deserved to know. Then, I went to the front desk to grab a piece of Scotch tape. I removed her phone's battery, put a tiny piece of tape over the contacts, and replaced it. The phone would seem dead, and without a charger, she'd be stuck. Around 8 a.m., I heard shouting from one of the boyfriends of the women who'd been with Harry. It seemed they'd found the video I left for them. "You cheated on me. Tell your family the wedding's off. I never want to see you again," one guy yelled. The other boyfriend stood there, his face stony, as his girlfriend pleaded, "Please, baby, I'm so sorry. It was a stupid mistake, and you've already got even with him." "You're disgusting," he said coldly. "Go back to your new guy. He might have a bigger Johnson, but I doubt it'll be working well anytime soon." I could only wonder what they'd done to Harry, but I'd never know for sure. Shortly after, I heard the wail of an ambulance. The resort manager rushed over and led the EMTs to Harry's room. I hoped he'd be okay, but I didn't stick around to find out. Instead, I slipped away and hailed a cab to the airport. On the ride there, I turned on my phone and saw I had a voicemail. It was my brother Robert. "Jamie, what's going on? I got a bunch of pics and some explicit videos of Wendy. I mean, she's good looking, but why am I seeing this? Do you know anything about this? Call me back." Waiting at the airport, I called him and filled him in. How Wendy had been cheating with Harry and had planned to get pregnant by him. At first, Robert thought I was pulling a prank, but when I told him to look closely at the videos, he was floored. He apologized and offered to help however he could. I thanked him and hung up, soon boarding my flight home, alone. When I landed, I turned on Harry's phone and found a barrage of angry messages and voicemails. Clearly, the photos and videos had struck a nerve. I grabbed my bags, retrieved my car, and started driving home, piecing together my next moves. Divorce was an option, but if I went through with it, she'd get half. That didn't sit right with me. So, a new plan began to take shape as I drove. If she'd ruined our marriage, I'd make her life just as miserable in return. I called my brother to help me move my stuff out before Wendy got back, leaving her to walk into an empty house. My phone buzzed with messages, mostly from her family, asking where she was. The fact that there was no text from Wendy herself meant she hadn't figured it out yet, and I smirked, imagining her panic when she finally did. Once I got home, I canceled all our credit cards and transferred the money from our joint account. Then, I started packing up my things, tossing any gifts from Wendy and unplugging the house phone. Around 11 p.m., I finally saw a flood of messages from her. "Where are you? Why did you leave me? Are you okay?" But the message that struck me was her attempt at sympathy. "Why did you do this? Couldn't we have talked?" I ignored every message, knowing it would only drive her frustration higher. The next day was a whirlwind, knowing I had limited time before she might find a way back. I needed to move fast. First, I bought boxes and rented a large storage unit. Then I went to the bank, emptied our joint account, and moved the money to my business account. I thought about closing it and disappearing entirely, but I had some loose ends to wrap up first. Our house was a modest 2-bedroom, 1-bath starter home. I'd once dreamed of fixing it up for our future, but now I had different plans. I wanted to leave Wendy a homecoming she'd never forget. Later that morning, Robert came over with his pickup truck. We loaded up my stuff, making 3 trips to the storage unit, which took us over 5 hours. By the afternoon, I was completely moved out. I didn't tell Robert about my plans for the house or the final surprise I was preparing for Wendy, knowing he'd try to talk me out of it. He did ask what my next steps were, though. "I'm just leaving town, Rob. Escaping this nightmare of a marriage. I don't plan on divorcing her, but I won't be here when she gets back. She can keep the house, but that's it," I said firmly. Robert shook his head. "Jamie, that's not going to work. She'll hire a lawyer and track you down. Just divorce her and move on. Running will only make things worse. Don't let anger control your choices. Be responsible. Get a lawyer, and split things evenly." "No way," I replied coldly. "She betrayed me and tried to pass off another man's kid as mine. She deserves nothing. I'm not giving her the satisfaction of a divorce. I'm leaving her penniless and exposed for the liar she is." Seeing I was set in my decision, Robert didn't push further. He left, cautioning me to think carefully, but my mind had been made up the moment I'd seen her with Harry. It was time to put my plan into action. That night, I set to work in the house, tearing through it with single-minded purpose, preparing every detail for Wendy's inevitable return. I didn't know exactly when Wendy would be back, so I had to move quickly. Fortunately, a massive snowstorm was forecasted, shutting down the airports and buying me more time. The heavy snow would also help cover my tracks. Ignoring the flood of calls, especially from Wendy, I finally picked up one, ready to extract any information I needed. She sounded desperate, admitting her mistakes and pleading for a chance to make things right. Her tears didn't affect me. I was far past that, but I played along, dangling a hint of reconciliation just out of reach. "Why did you do this to us? Don't you love me?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but with a trace of sadness. Inside, though, I was seething. I needed her to believe there was a sliver of hope. "It meant nothing, baby. Please, forgive me," she sobbed. "I don't know if we can fix this," I replied after a pause, keeping her on edge. "We can get through this, and our love will be stronger," she pleaded, sounding more desperate with each word. "I'm not sure. When are you coming back?" I asked, trying to sound hesitant. "I'm stranded without a passport or ticket. My sister's wiring me money since my credit cards got stolen. Oh, and cancel those cards, please," she added, switching from begging to practical matters. "I'll handle it. But when do you think you'll be back?" I pressed. "In a few days, once I get a new passport from the consulate," she answered. "Let me know when you're leaving, okay?" I said casually.
"I will, Jamie."
"I love you," she added, hoping for reassurance. "See you when you're back," I replied, hanging up. She'd be stuck for a few days, which was perfect. That gave me all the time I needed to finalize my plans and prepare for life without her. The next day, Robert called to check in, inviting me over for dinner. After a week of surviving on takeout, a home-cooked meal sounded too good to pass up. I reassured him I wouldn't do anything impulsive. Later that day, Wendy called again. "Hey, babe, good news. I'll have a new passport soon and just need a plane ticket home. I could be back in a few days, maybe late afternoon. Could you pick me up from the airport? I really want us to talk as soon as I'm back," she said, hopeful. "I don't think that's a good idea, Wendy. You should have your sister pick you up." "We'll talk when you get home," I replied, knowing I'd be long gone by then. "Okay, babe. I love you, and I know we can work this out if you just give us a chance. Okay?" she pleaded. "Yeah, we'll talk when you're back." "No promises," I lied smoothly. With her timeline set, I had a clear window to wrap things up and leave. First, I sold my work truck and bought a replacement registered in a friend's name. Then, I informed my employees I'd be closing the business due to personal reasons. It was abrupt, but they deserved to know. Afterward, I reached out to an old college buddy in Colorado who'd once suggested we start a business together. He was shocked to hear about Wendy, having known us back when we were dating, and he quickly agreed to let me join him. I requested to work under the table, keeping Wendy from tracking me down or claiming money. With everything arranged, I was ready to leave. Wendy continued calling nonstop, apologizing and professing her love, but I remained resolute. The day before her expected return, I loaded up my new truck and cleared out the house. Early the next morning, I slipped out of town unnoticed. Before leaving, I asked my neighbor to record Wendy's arrival, hinting that there was a surprise waiting for her, without revealing the real reason. He agreed, unaware of the truth, and awaited my call. As I drove toward my new life, a mixture of freedom and anticipation filled me. Everything was in place. The long drive to Colorado stretched ahead of me, and by the time I arrived, Wendy would be back to face the ruins I'd left behind. Somewhere along the road, a surprising sense of calm washed over me, a stark contrast to the rage and despair I'd felt since catching Wendy with Harry. Maybe hitting rock bottom had given me the push to start rebuilding. Around noon, Wendy called to say she'd be home the next day by 4 p.m. She asked if I'd pick her up from the airport, but I told her I had errands and would be home later. I also instructed my neighbor to have his camera ready for the surprise awaiting her. The next day, as I neared Colorado, my phone rang, and this time Wendy was in a complete panic. The house. It collapsed. It must have been the snow. I barely put the key in the door, and the whole roof came crashing down. "Our house is gone," she screamed. "Don't worry, Wendy. I made other arrangements," I said, my tone steady. "How can you be so calm? Our house just collapsed," she yelled, fury mingling with her shock. "It didn't collapse because of the snow. I made sure it happened, Wendy. I did to our house what you did to our marriage. Good luck finding a new place to live." "I'm nearly at my new home," I replied coldly before hanging up. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was my neighbor. "Jamie, you won't believe this. Your house just collapsed. Looked like it couldn't handle the snow, but there wasn't enough snow for that kind of damage. Your wife's okay, though. She was at the door when it came down." I thanked him, asking him to send me the video when he could. After our conversation, I turned off my phone and continued driving, my mind focused on the future. It's been almost 3 years now since I started over in Colorado. I keep in touch with a few friends back in Minnesota, though I avoid contacting family directly to prevent them from giving away my location to Wendy. News eventually reached me that Wendy had gotten what she wanted. She was pregnant with Harry's child. She spread lies, claiming the baby was mine and that I'd abandoned her out of fear of fatherhood. Even my own mother fell for it, desperate to believe she had a grandchild on the way. I had a friend suggest a DNA test through my brother. If I were the father, it would match closely with his DNA. If not, it wouldn't. Wendy, eager to prove her story, agreed, and the results confirmed I wasn't the father. Enraged by Wendy's deceit, my mother cut her off completely. As for Harry, he hadn't escaped the fallout. After the thrashing he received from the 2 men at the resort, he ended up hospitalized for over a week. When he finally returned home, he found several of his ex-lovers waiting to confront him. Rumor has it he lost a testicle in the ordeal, ending his days of womanizing for good.